here, it's LowTechDerrick. I thought I might just share a few thoughts on trucking versus yachting or seafaring in general, the way I experienced it over the last 5 years. Now, let's start in medias res, driving. I pursued a DEX career in seafaring, so started at the bottom with a local yacht master, upgraded to Yacht Master Ocean under the MCA line, and eventually went to a Master 200 Officer 500 ticket, endorsed by Malta and the Cayman Islands, which I thought was going to open the door, together with my US B1, B2 visa, to a year-round work environment, as in summer in the Med, sorry, winter in the Caribbean, and the downtime spent on either end at one of my pied-à-terres, the one I had in southern France and the one in Nova Scotia, which would geographically be absolutely perfect, close to airports and waterways and hotspots of the yachting and research industries. Now, let's talk about drive time. I'm back to trucking now for 6 months here in Canada, in the prairies, Saskatchewan based mainly. I'm obviously driving 5 to 6 days a week, basically all year round. That's the plan. In seafaring, I accumulated around about a month of drive time myself at the helm, at the wheel, in 5 years. So drive time, if you're pursuing a DEX career, is a big question mark. If you're lucky, you'll find a boat that actually drives. Now next is age. I'm going on 50, so I started in the seafaring environment, early 40s. To me that wasn't a hindrance, but apparently to the industry it is. So when they see people over 30 with small tickets, no matter their experience or background, it's just not interesting. So I struggled to actually smoothen the year out with year-round work, had a lot of downtime, and eventually in these 5 years, the pandemic obviously didn't help. The downtime was just not affordable anymore. So I called it quits, went back land-based, and I'm back in trucking, where I came from about 10 years earlier. Trucking, seafaring and ex-military, these are my passions or professional background, and I had to learn along the way that this is actually what I consider qualities, as in head down, we get shit done, and you know, we're used to handling hundreds of thousands worth of equipment, as well as traveling and living mobile, living in cramped spaces, having no decent Western life. To me that's normal. So I consider this a quality, but I had to learn that when I sent out my CV, people, they kind of figured ex-military, oh, he must be a violent guy, we don't want that. So the security aspect, etc., that I thought was a plus, never really mattered. The other thing is, trucking, by the general public, I believe, unfortunately, and wrongly so, is considered a dirty work with primitive people, kind of like grease monkey style. So I had to tune this down a little bit on my seafaring CV and just called it logistics. That kind of helped, which brings me to the next subject, sending out a number of CVs. So over the last 5 years, I sent out an average of 380 CVs for one longer term seafaring contract. Now let that sink in for a minute. 380 something CVs for one longer term serious gig. Trucking in Canada, to me, cost me about a year, a lot of agency fees, and around about 150 CVs until I got this gig that I'm working on now, which I'm very thankful for, and that seems to be working out quite well. curve obviously is huge on both ends. Age, ticket size, drive time, especially if you're considering a DEX career, are really important points to consider. The next thing is equipment. In seafaring, it's a lot of tinkering, mostly polishing and clean things basically. Getting worked up if the stewardess touches the windows that you've just nicely polished. It's not all the stewardess's fault, but you get the point. Next, food. That's, I think, the number one item I miss from my seafaring days back to trucking. I mean, as a crew we were spoiled usually by the same chefs that were cooking for the guests if we were on a charter or privately owned yacht, or at least a crew chef on the research vessels I worked on. So from all walks of life and different styles of cuisines, you're just being spoiled and you don't have to worry about things. So that frees up a lot of work time, or daytime I should say, for the actual job. Whereas in trucking, you have the trucking job, which usually is 12 to 15 hours a day, plus the commute if you're on a day job like I am now, plus cooking, plus laundry, plus. So there's no stewardess taking care of your truck cabin now. Now another point is cost. Obviously a land job costs a lot more money than a seafaring job. Now what do I mean by that? On a land job you definitely need a car around here. You gotta live somewhere. You got food expenses. Usually taxes are a big issue, depending on what your national setup is. So keep that in mind as well. The minute you go to sea, all your expenses are usually covered. But, now that's a big but. Usually there's no social system attached to it. That means no health care once you're back on the land, with maybe a week or two to spare. Holidays. Land jobs, they have more or less regulated holiday times. Whereas a seafaring gig, you're accruing it while you're working. So you can be working a whole month through and you get 2 or 3 days accrued that usually are being paid out at the end of the gig. So the systems are different. Be flexible, because it's not 9 to 5, which brings me to working hours. I think trucking and seafaring are pretty much the same. They're an average of 60-70 hours a week, day and night shifts. Totally flexible at random of the needs of the trucking or seafaring company. You'll have shift work and interrupted sleep on both gigs, obviously. So just to give you a bit of an insight into legal framework, in seafaring, according to Maritime Labour Convention, you have the right of 10 hours of rest at the discretion of the captain or first officer or chief officer, depending on the department that you're in, to cut it down to a minimum of 6+4 or 6+2+2. Now usually that never works in a small environment. So bear that in mind if you need your regular body clock to be adjusted with 8 hours of sleep from 2. This work environment, either or, is not for you. I'm just being upfront. When it comes to time of life, seafaring to me was a great adventure. I've seen places I would have never seen on an office chair or in a truck, obviously. But these 5 years I spent offshore, besides the adventure factor, don't count on friends and family. Forget about that. If you have kids or a wife, it's not gonna work. Girlfriends, boyfriends, forget it. You might make great friends along the way, for sure, but now that I'm back land-based for 6 months, even that fades. So be prepared for a pretty lonely social life. Obviously that's my perspective. Other than that, it definitely ticks the adventure box. coming back to the money issue, pay-wise on the income side, at my level, I'd say they're about the same. But if you break it down to year-round divided by hours, seafaring to me hasn't worked out. Because of all the downtime and because of additional cost due to crew housing in between gigs, due to courses and licensing fees that obviously come out of your pocket, it's very rare that a boat pays for your education. I personally have only met a handful of people who had this luck. So, to give you a numbers perspective, my seafaring tickets altogether, including the time I spent on land, now that's not opportunity costs, that's just lodging, food, flights, Ubers, stuff like that. I put 35,000 US into my seafaring ticket. Compare that to trucking to me on 3 different continents with an Australian, a European and now a Canadian license, including all the courses for dangerous goods, bulk, all the additional goodies that I offer on the market. I usually got sponsored by either the army back in the days or 2 companies I worked for. So my out of pocket for the trucking licenses is around about 10,000 US. Now that's fairly cheap for a job that, or a profession I should say, that pays comparatively well. So here I'm opening a bracket. I got started in trucking in the 90s. Now to me, back in the 90s, that was a way out of poverty. These days, especially in Europe, where I'm originally coming from, I believe it's a way straight back into poverty. The way I live it here in Canada, they may have the same issues 10 or 15 years down the road. What I mean by that is opening borders, dropping rates, globalization in terms of supply chains that simply change the environment of the market. I urge you to do more research on that if you want to get started in either or the industries. Something I kind of mentioned before, I found that the niche in trucking kind of like opens the door for calmer, more mature people. So me going on 50, that's a point I really enjoy. So far nobody pointed with the finger at me and said, hey, you're old, hey, you're fat, you're unfit, hey, you're living on pills. That's a little bit of BS. I don't think you can relate age to being either stupid or outdated or whatever. Although my brand name is LowTechDerrick. So these are my main points that I thought I might just share with you guys if anybody's out there interested in comparing trucking to seafaring. Obviously, I'm a niche man, right? So I was in niche in trucking before. I was in reefers and foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals. Then took on a little logistics job, which opened up the way for my seafaring career. Now I'm back into fuel hauling, so I'm driving a B-train tanker. Also a niche of the trucking industry. So yes, I do compare niche work, and it may not all apply to you guys out there doing general cargo or working on cargo vessels. But for these 2 niches, I mean, give this video a like if you get some value from it. Subscribe to my channel. I usually run 3 different subjects. One's macroeconomy, one's the whole Canada project that I keep you guys updated on, and the other thing's my affiliate marketing business that I'm kind of like treating as a side hustle, but it's coming out quite nicely, so I'm pleased with all that. Also, I share a few impressions of the Canadian prairies. I'm on Highway 11, cruising direction Saskatoon until I have to turn off shortly. So taking advantage of having a chat with you guys. You will keep the rubber side down, the oily side down, and the polished side up. Have fun!